I'm going to hit record. I'm going to give you a brief introduction, Chancellor Gilliam. I hear you don't like long ones.
I do not.
Oh, a technical question?
Okay,
No.
we are live.
Oh,
Do you still want to ask or no? Okay, here we go. All right. Well, good morning. Welcome to the annual Conference on African American Cultures and Experiences at UNC Greensboro. My name is Noelle Morissette. I am the current director of the program in African American and African Diaspora Studies here. And you know, this is an annual conference. This is our first virtual conference. We could not imagine a year without CACE. Particularly after this past year of events and conversations, it seemed like a vital thing for us to continue and to grow. So we welcome you. It's my great pleasure to introduce Chancellor Frank Gilliam, who will give the opening remarks to our conference. Chancellor Gilliam has devoted over 30 years to higher education as an award-winning professor of political science and public policy. He uses this background as a visionary and civic leader of our university. A senior fellow with the Frameworks Institute, which is a MacArthur award-winning institution. Chancellor Gilliam has focused his research and training on healthcare, racial equity, early childhood development, youth and rural issues, and criminal justice. Since arriving at UNC Greensboro, Chancellor Gilliam has grown our student enrollment and our endowment, has deepened our research enterprise and our campus infrastructure, and has elevated the presence, reputation, and real-world impact of our university in what is the largest institution in the North Carolina Triad region. Chancellor Gilliam is also the first African-American chancellor to lead a non-HBCU in the UNC system. He is also a gifted and unifying speaker who inspires us through his leadership of our university. And so we are delighted to have your guiding words, Chancellor Gilliam.
Thank you, Professor Morissette, and good morning to one and all, wherever you may be, apparently. Hopefully we're a global community. I'm really pleased to be opening the 2021 CACE conference this year. I'd like to thank Annelle Trigg-Johnson, who's an alumna of the Women's College, for her generous support of both the university and of this conference. I've been going through the panels, and as I said to the panelists before we came on, I've been just stunned at the robustness of this conference and all that you plan to pack into 2 days. I'll be dropping in and out of some of the sessions because they just look so interesting and thought-provoking and challenging, and indeed expressing a sense of urgency, which I think we all feel in this day and age. So I'm thrilled to be opening the conference up and welcoming folks to UNC Greensboro. I don't think you could have picked a better theme for the conference. I don't know if this was great foreshadowing, but the Year of the Black Woman, Civic Engagement, could not be more timely. And I think we've witnessed the strength and resiliency of Black women and women of color, and frankly, all women here over the last several months, particularly with regard to the presidential election and then the Senate runoff election in Georgia. Stacey Abrams, Vice President Harris are just two obvious examples of the power of Black women. You know, I reflected on this because, as some of the local folks here know, I lost my mother in October. And it was my mother that got me interested in politics. She was an activist. We lived in Canada for the first 12 years of my life, and we weren't too many Black Canadians there, and certainly not too many Black American Canadians there. But she seemed to be the central point for the aspiring Black leaders in Canada. And as we moved back to the States, she was the one who really got me interested in and involved in politics. And obviously went on to a career as a political scientist for a long time. And so it's just all sort of coming together for me here. Remembering my mother, the Black women who played such an instrumental role over the last several months in particular, and then this conference. So I wanted to just start some more formal remarks with a quote from Nikki Giovanni. And it's one I really resonate to. She says, "I really don't think life is about the I could have beens. Life is only about the I tried to do. I don't mind the failure, but I can't imagine that I'd forgive myself if I didn't try." And it's such a powerful quote, because a lot of apathy is centered around, well, I could have been, it could have been, we could have done, what had happened was. And I tell my folks here at our university, I don't mind if you fail. What I mind is if you don't try. And so I think that we're trying to unravel a very complicated time in the history, not only of the United States, but globally, as we grapple with questions of equity, power, gender, race, ethnicity, religion. It all seems to be coming to a head. And it's, I think, critical now that we see that many Black women are leading the way in thinking about this. Let me brag a little bit about our own campus, given that this is a panel on Black women leaders in education, and some of them are on the panelists today. We are having a first cohort of our leadership program, guided by the Center for Creative Leadership, and women of color are our first cohort, so we're proud of that. Many people know Professor Andrea Hunter, who is our Chancellor's Fellow leading our EDI work. And if you've not seen our new website, I would, on equity, diversity, and inclusion, I would encourage you to. It's fabulous. I don't say that about websites generally, because mostly they're terrible. But this one's a really, really good one. And I'm really proud of it. We're investing in pathways to equity, which is focusing on mentoring faculty, women faculty, but also, and my sort of North Star in this is the importance of having women and people of color in leadership positions. In the university, it's easy to say that the institution diversifies and they hire a bunch of assistant professors and then throw up the numbers and say, look, we're diversified. Nothing wrong with assistant professors. I was one once. But the point is that it's at the leadership levels of institutions that decisions get made. And in many cases, it is the prevention of some decisions being made that's just as important as the decisions you make. So I'm extremely interested in the development of at our university. We'll have a new diversity dashboard and training commons up soon. So we'll be able to be transparent, but also hold ourselves accountable. This is a time period in our country's history where there's a lot of words. And my question is, how much action will there be? And as I've told our folks working on EDI issues on campus. You know, having models, theories of change, having reports and so on is wonderful. But bring me 3 things that you have changed. I want 3 things to have changed at this institution permanently. And you have to take action to do that. I was just mentoring a young African-American staff woman yesterday afternoon, actually. She's asked if she meet with me. She's been a member of our staff senate. She's interested in leadership. And so I had this conversation. I've also mentored her husband, who is not an employee at our university. He just asked, and I said, sure. But I said to her, she needed to be heard. She needed to take up space. Because as I started talking with her, really in a more detailed and in-depth way, I discovered that she was extremely bright and extremely insightful. But in public settings, she had kind of receded into the background. And believe me, I understand what it means to be in a meeting to this day, and you say something, and no, it doesn't appear to register, and then some majority group male says the exact same thing, and you're sitting there thinking to yourself, didn't I just say that? Didn't I say exactly just that? And nobody heard me? And I've had it happen in a room full of presidents recently. You know, and we allow ourselves to be gaslit. There's this concept of gaslighting I'm very, very interested in, because I think it's what's happened in race in America. The country's been gaslit. It's not as bad as you think. You're making it up. It's not about race. I don't see, go down the list. So I think it's important for women, people of color, and Black women in particular, to be heard, to be seen, and to take up space. Because I can speak from, and we were talking about this yesterday, from the male point of view, right? We seem to take up space. Some people refer to it as trying to prove you're the smartest boy in the class. It's about taking up space, right? So irritates me. But nonetheless, I recognize that with certain privilege, we take up space, and whether it's physical space or intellectual space. And, you know, you've got to compete for that space. Women have to compete for that space and understand that that space is every bit yours, as much yours as it is anyone else's. And I was talking to this young woman. She said, well, I'm afraid to kind of ask for this or I do that. And I said, look, and it's am I unmuted now? Did you mute me, Professor Morissette? Was I getting too close to the bone? What? Don't get me started now. Aisha knows I can maybe come off the chain at any point in time. So point I was making is that you have to make yourself seen and heard. Oh, and the last point I'll say, anything you've thought of asking for, I'm just going to start, this is being recorded, so I can't say it. Somebody else, wink, wink, has asked for 5 times as much as you asking for. You're sitting there, oh, should I ask? It's too much. No, it's not too much. Because believe me, somebody else, wink, wink, has asked for it 5 times what you're thinking about asking for. And that's about taking up space and occupying space. I know privilege allows you to do that, but we're all in this. We're fighting for our space, for our voice to be heard. And that's why the Nikki Giovanni quote resonates to me. Because I'd rather try this and fail than to say, no, I'm afraid of failure. I don't want to try, or somebody else should do it. So I hope this conference, and in so many ways, in looking at the panels, coming at these issues from so many angles, really results in people using their voice, being heard, taking up space, and taking action. So I think I've probably used up my time. I'm like any professor, you give me an open mic, I got 90 minutes, no notes, and then I got some notes here if I need to go another 90 minutes, but I think I should stop then and be a bit more gracious. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chancellor Gilliam, so much for your remarks. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Camille Wilson. Dr. Camille Wilson is a University Diversity and Social Transformation Professor and Professor of Educational Foundations, Leadership and Policy at the University of Michigan. She explores the intersections of school, family, community engagement, urban educational reform, and transformative leadership. Dr. Wilson's work highlights the educational advocacy, activism, and school choices of marginalized families of color and the equity-based efforts of school-based leaders striving to better serve those communities. She has published extensively in leading national and international journals, and she is co-editor of the book Advancing Equity and Achievement in America's Diverse Schools, Inclusive Theories, Policies, and Practices, which came out from Routledge in 2014. Dr. Wilson also actively collaborates with youth, family, and community activists in national and regional educational improvement initiatives. Dr. Wilson has presented her work throughout the United States at many international venues, including as an invited guest lecturer at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, South Africa, and as a visiting professor at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill in Barbados. Her work and commentary has also been featured in prominent media outlets like the New York Times and Harper's Bazaar. In addition to being a professor, she is the founding director of the University of Michigan's CREATE Center. The CREATE Center fosters community-based research on equity, activism, and transformative education. I also have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Aisha Boyce. Dr. Aisha Boyce is an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Research Methodology here at UNC Greensboro. She also co-directs the UNC Greensboro Office of Assessment, Evaluation, and Research Services. Dr. Boyce's scholarship focuses on attending to value stances and issues related to diversity, equity, inclusion, access, cultural responsiveness, and social justice within evaluation, especially multi-site STEM and contexts with historically marginalized populations. Dr. Boyce also examines teaching, mentoring, and learning in evaluation. She has evaluated over 50 programs funded by the National Science Foundation, U.S. Department of Education, National Institutes of Health, and Spencer and Teagle Foundations. She is currently the external evaluator for 5 NSF-funded projects and a co-principal investigator on 4 NSF-funded projects. She is a co-PI on the recently funded $1 million NSF grant, Spartans Advance, Adaptations of Practices for Faculty Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at UNCG. Dr. Boyce is a 2019 American Evaluation Association Marcia Guten Tag Promising New Evaluator Award recipient and a 2019 UNCG School of Education Distinguished Research Scholar recipient. In her teaching and her mentorship, Dr. Boyce encourages students to develop a strong methodological foundation, conduct studies based on democratic principles, and promote equity, fairness, inclusivity, and diversity. And then we have also Dr. April Ruffin-Adams, who is a social worker with a doctorate in education from UNC Greensboro. She has served as a visiting assistant professor of African American and African diaspora studies and regularly lectures in the program. Her research includes work on Black motherhood, advocacy, and resistance. And I am pleased to have such a storied panel here to talk about Black women leaders in education. Yeah, I'd like for this to be just a conversation that you are having with each other with fairly basic questions, thinking about just some of the things that our community members and our students here at UNCG may want to ask you about your roles as Black women leaders in education. So, you know, if you want to talk about a current project that you're working on and work that through to thinking about how you got to where you got in terms of your research, right? We don't have exact paths that are assigned to us from birth, right? We sort of feel our way sometimes to get to those more precise trajectories of what is truly important to us, what our calling is. So to talk about those things and to talk about what you think are some of the challenges that you're facing as leaders in education and where we need to be looking to come up with some future way of being, you know? So in other words, where you would like to see us go just as educators and the particular challenges or things you think are important for people to know about Black women leaders in education. And so I'll start off with Dr. Wilson, who has founded this new institute at the University of Michigan. And I think just if you can give us a sense of that project a little bit, or something else that you've been working on.
Sure. I'll say a little bit to lead up to the center establishment. So I really resonated with what Chancellor Gilliam shared and love the quote by Nikki Giovanni. So as I've, in preparation of this, as I've reflected on my own leadership, I think I have led for a long time, like I'm sure all of us in different spaces, and including as an assistant professor, untenured, and that carries a lot of risk, right? And I think a key way that I have led is with my voice and my advocacy, the combination of both of those. And, you know, still within academia, there's so many expectations and so much messaging to untenured faculty to be quiet. And I've never been quiet. I'm a vocal person, particularly when it comes to advocating for things I believe in. And that meant me taking concerted risks constantly as an untenured professor. But you know, one thing that my mother taught me was to never be complicit in my own silencing. And so that's a part of who I am. And you know, there are times where, you know, I made some missteps around that, but overall, you know, it's been really important for me to be true to myself. Particularly in striving to advance equity and speak up when things have gone on that I thought were unfair and unjust. And that means doing that within the institution as smartly as possible, right? And so, so professionally, in terms of my faculty career, that's, you know, this desire to work for equity and justice, kind of my natural inclination to advocate has been, you know, core to my leadership and started at UNCG, where I started my faculty career and earned tenure. And so getting to my research, Very broadly, I am interested in school, family, community engagement issues, and very specifically issues of advocacy and activism. So part of what I study, I also do, right? And I think that's really important to my own sense of integrity. So over the years, that has led me from advocating in practice as I do my work, and I do my work in various professional spaces, whether it be my department or the school at large, or in national spaces where I'm on committees, and also on my research teams. Over the years, that has now culminated in me establishing a research center. So the vision of the CACE Center is to bring university researchers and community advocates and activists together to leverage research in ways that do advance educational justice. So for instance, I've had partnerships with community organizers in Detroit for 6 years now. And being involved in that partnership and nurturing and mentoring my advisees, who have also contributed greatly to that partnership, has been the most rewarding part of the work that I've done in my career so far. And so I really wanted to build upon that and think about how can I help be a part of broader efforts to foster collaboration between on the ground, grassroots activists and university researchers committed to justice. So the center is brand new. We launched in October, and it's small and growing. And so it houses various research initiatives. For instance, I'm a lead PI on a project related to dismantling the school to prison pipeline that brings together various action research teams based in Detroit. Also continuing work related to community organizers and their campaigns towards educational justice, and have some other projects. So it houses research. It also offers programming related to community-based research for equity, activism, and transformative education. And then an important part of the vision is growing a network of both scholars, community-based folks in Michigan, at U of M, but beyond. So having affiliates across the country and also in other spaces outside of the US. So my hope is that the center can be a little hub for a community of people committed to this type of collaboration and activist-oriented research. So that's some context, to the center. And again, it's a reflection of a long trajectory. This is my 18th year as a faculty member. So it's a significant place for me to be in terms of my own growth and hopefully my own impact, for the field, but also for communities that I care very much about. And I think also it reflects a desire I've had, from the very beginning to be a part of lasting change for educational justice. And it's also, as an assistant professor, it's daunting to think about, at least it was daunting for me, to think about making the change I wanted to at the scale that I wanted to. So in leading, I've also had to be very patient with myself and very realistic about the fact that things take time. It's required my own learning, my own networking, my own failures, and a lot of my own growth in partnership building over the years. So this is, it's reflective of all of that effort, all of that growth and experience. And now I'm at a new level where I keep growing and now, learn of new skills that I need to build, right? To be able to run a center and grow a center at a major university. So it's exciting. Thank you.
I love hearing about that. Dr. Boyce, would you like to talk about just, what the same types of things, but your own personal trajectory and what you do and how you do it?
Sure. A lot of what Dr. Wilson said really resonated with me because I am an assistant professor. I'm should get a letter any day now notifying me that I have earned tenure, but I don't have the letter in hand yet. So I believe it's coming, but so still kind of waiting on that. And as a lot of what she said really had me reflecting on my trajectory here at UNCG and my the work that I've done so far and the work that I've chosen not to do so far. And so she's exactly right. I think that, as an assistant professor, you on the tenure track, you are in many ways in a position that by some can be considered vulnerable. And I think about, my first kind of 3 years here compared to my second 3 years here. And they look very different. I think when I look back, I often at times, kind of was more quiet and was more worried about what my narrative would be or how people would perceive me and how their own personal or professional interactions with me, how that may or may not end up in conversations when it was time to review my dossier for tenure. And for me, it really wasn't until after my reappointment that I felt empowered to make some moves and to make more of a splash because I felt more comfortable with the narrative that I was building and more comfortable with what was currently kind of on my CV. And I felt less worried about what others were going to say because I had proven to myself that I deserved to be here, that I belonged to be here. Some know that, after my first year here at UNCG, I considered leaving academia because my first author paper was a desk reject, meaning that it didn't even get sent out for review. A couple of grants that I had went for did not hit. And so I finished up my first year feeling like, whoa, can I do this? Do I belong here? Am I cut out for this? Right. And I was really fortunate to have some strong mentorship in peers and other faculty with similar lived experiences and on similar trajectories to me here at UNCG, and to have excellent mentorship and advocacy from those within my field and also my department chair. And so I fast forward, 5.5 years later, I guess 4.5 years later, and my dossier has $3.7 million in funding, 17 publications, great, peer reviews and great course evaluations. And I think that's kind of a testimony to sticking with it and really having others who believe in you and advocate for you, but also kind of believing in yourself. And I think, as many, I guess kind of what I'll share a little bit about is kind of the work that my department is doing. So after the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020, I really felt moved and disgusted and all of those feelings that many people feel. And as an assistant professor on the cusp of going up for tenure, I thought, man, like we really should do something about this. I should reach out to my students. I'm in a graduate only department and we have many students of African descent. And so after kind of reaching out to them and hearing some of kind of their experiences here at the university and within my department, I decided to draft a letter and have everyone in my department from African descent sign it and send it to my chair, which was really scary because, a week or two later, here comes my dossier, which again, I was very proud of. But it's scary. And we had things that we wanted to see change within the department. I mean, frankly, and we CC'd Andrea Hunter and the dean and lots of people. And it was really scary hitting send on that. But I also think about a lot of the amazing change. And I'm cautiously optimistic about the work that's being done in my department. I'm in the methodology department, where if you think about statistics and program evaluation, many would say, well, why are you talking about justice? Like, I'm just here to run the numbers, right? But what we know is that, previous work from those who are in power have misinterpreted and distorted and misrepresented numbers as, when it comes to working with communities of color. And so, I would argue and continue to argue that this is one of the most important places to be thinking about issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so, I think that letter was taken up with great seriousness. And, now in my department, we've, I think we're real champions, or we continue to be champions of these issues. And we have 2 department meetings a month now, and one of them is just dedicated to talking about these issues. We've had trainings, ongoing trainings. We're going to have a town hall. And we're also going to be taking a look at some of our policies more closely. And so for me, I feel really proud that this person who started off like, do I even belong here? Can I make a difference here? It's completely revolutionizing kind of the work that we're doing. I also co-direct the UNCG Office of Assessment, Evaluation, and Research Services, and we provide technical and methodological expertise in assessment, program evaluation, and measurement to UNCG, also across North Carolina, as well as nationally. And so what's really important to me is that all the work that we do has kind of like a social justice and equity focus. And we're explicit about that when people come to us and know what they're going to be getting when in terms of if you want a program evaluation from us. And so, when I look at my future and how things will continue, especially as I'm on the cusp of earning tenure and looking at, what's next for me, I just continue to think about, I have articles that are coming out that I was probably a little bit scared to write my first year. I have an article that's coming out in a couple of months about mentoring students of color, graduate students of color. And it was very cathartic for me to write that and talk about my experiences and talk about, the transition from being a graduate student to being someone who was a mentor and an advocate. And so I'm just so honored to be here on this panel and appreciate you. I consider myself kind of an emerging leader. I'm excited about the work that a lot of what Chancellor Gilliam has mentioned at UNCG and kind of some of the shifts that have happened in my own field of program evaluation. And I'm just looking forward to taking up space and being part of those conversations. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boyce. And Dr. Ruffin-Adams, let's hear from you as well. Tell us about a leadership position in education and just your path, please.
So my path begins with Dr. Wilson. So, of course, I started out in ELC as a student, and I would say that during that time, I was able to really examine both the professional and leadership roles of the faculty and, to sort of come up with what I wanted to do. So I would say that, the difference between the type of leadership roles that I feel than Dr. Wilson and Dr. Boyce is I'm much more of a community engagement leader. So I'm much more loosely connected to the university. I am an adjunct, and I have really felt comfortable in that position. It's a wonderful choice for me in terms of the ability to have the leadership roles that I have in the community. Speaking of which, so let me give you an instance. For yesterday, I taught 3 classes yesterday via Zoom. Black women in the US at 9:00. Then I gave a talk in middle to 50 women here in the community who invited me to talk about raising Black children in white spaces. Then I taught Introduction to African American Studies. In between that, I jumped into a board meeting for a museum board that I'm on and made contributions for what do you call EDI, DEI, equity and inclusion for board member nominations, because I serve as the chair of diversity and inclusion for the board. And then in between class, and then taught my final class, all of that before 2:00. So that's my typical, well, that was an atypical day, but that's my type of involvement. So I lead in my board positions. I'm very politically active in the community. So I'm much looser on the university front, but much more engaged in the community setting. And as I tell my students, one of the things, particularly with the summer and the George Floyd issues and this extreme tension that we've been living under with the pandemic, as I taught class over the summer, I tell my students, listen, I can't be involved in every movement, but what I can do is I can talk to you and I can give you the information that is going to be inspirational to you so that you can go out, and I am making you my little soldier, right? You are going to go out. I am the Army general, and I'm creating these little soldiers to go out, and these students are making a mark, and they're making a mark because I'm able to show them how history has influenced the way we live today. So my leadership role is first as a teacher. It's so much more powerful than people ever give us credit for. So that's one. Certainly for all of the roles that I play in the community. I've had so many opportunities lately to speak. So I would, Dr. Boyce said that she's an emerging leader. I would certainly say I'm an emerging leader. I would have a couple of months ago probably just told you that I was a stay-at-home mom and an adjunct professor. But all of a sudden now I'm speaking all the time. I just led a conference, well, not a conference, what is it? A book read on the book CACE for the museum board that I'm on. And I was able to bring in some of my colleagues to come and speak on behalf of the book to provide an African-American studies perspective. And so that's a leadership role, because I was able to, bring in my colleagues and share in what was for the museum the highest rated, highest attended events that they've ever had. So I would consider myself much more of a community engaged leader. And with this being the year of the woman, and of course I'm an AKA, and Kamala Harris is the vice president, and I have a daughter. I am also very aware of the fact that I am the mother of 2 Black children who will be leaders as well. And so I take that very seriously. So my daughter is an emerging leader herself, and I come to tears just thinking about her little leadership roles in school. But those are the leadership roles that I sit in, I guess. Thank you, and thank you, Noelle, for putting me on this panel. I mean, I just with Dr. Wilson and Dr. Boyce, I really appreciate it. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I've, you're all distinguished leaders in education, right? And there's so much extraordinary that you're talking about. One of the things that you're talking about is how you occupy space, right? And I'm also struck hearing you talk about, just, I guess some people would call this the work-life balance, but just it is integrated, right? And perhaps even the pandemic has made our lives more integrated, where, our familial roles, our roles at home merge or collide with our professional roles. And I'm also struck by just how much each one of you extraordinary leaders does, right? So I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that further, just as a challenge or a possibility. And I'm your grateful listener.
I can say a little bit to the challenge, and I've been speaking to it recently. So a strength of mine is I'm extremely resourceful, right? I think Black women are anyway, because we have to be. But also professionally, even as a qualitative researcher, I'm used qualitative researchers, we don't land the multi-million-dollar grants. We have to piece it together and still do great work. And that forces you to be very resourceful in terms of, and creative, right? So that's good, but that can also get in the way in ways that Chancellor Gilliam spoke to, right? Like I can be too resourceful for my own good, trying to do so much myself, and not asking for help, not having certain expectations from others, to like others who are relying on me for my work and my leadership, right? To give me the resources I need to do the work that they want me to do. So I think, being mindful of how non-Black folks and men just more commonly ask for more and receive more, right? And so even at this stage of my career, I'm continually reminding myself of that, and reminding myself to be assertive. I am going to my mentors to ask for guidance and ask for some insight about what good expectations I should have and what are some good things for me to ask for in terms of taking care of my own needs professionally, so I can do the work that I want to do. So that remains a challenge, still sometimes not knowing what I don't know, as still a first generation college educated person who's in academia as a leader, right?
Yeah, I like to follow up with something Dr. Ruffin Adams said, is this, that I actually had in my notes, so I'm glad it came up organically, is this idea of work-life balance in this time when, I think a lot of Black women are being asked to speak more, being asked to give more of our time, but we're also in the middle of a pandemic. So many people have children at home. My son, who's 2.5, he still goes to daycare for part of the day, but there was a while when he was home full time for about 9 weeks, and then sometimes his daycare shuts down because of COVID related things. And so I think about we're being recorded right now, but my last presentation a few weeks ago was about how to implement department diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives, and my son was home with me, and so I'm on video, but there's lots of times where he's like, "Mommy this, Mommy that," and I'm like, okay, I'm trying to talk about George Floyd right now, but I have to also attend to a toddler. And so I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the importance of work-life balance, and whether that, I have students who live alone who are struggling, and because they're missing the interaction, and I have students who are at home with families who are struggling because they're at home and they don't get a break. And so I think it's important for us to acknowledge the ways in which that the pandemic has completely changed our lives, and making sure that we're acknowledging that the lines should have probably been more blurred between work life and the fact that we have these other roles. And I think for me, one of the aspects of my life that I'm most proud of is the fact that I do have a child that feels loved, a little Black boy, and that I have been able to continue, not, sporadically, I schedule every hour of my day, but that I am able to continue to spend time with my husband and keep our relationship healthy. And those are things that are important to me. And those are things that I cherish. And those are things that I have tried to prioritize, even though, as Dr. Wilson has said, you can find money places, and you can find projects, and you can find opportunities to volunteer. But then you also have to find time for yourself, right? To take care of yourself. And I think that's one thing that we don't tell our students, and that we don't tell each other enough. Like, we have to be able to get up and walk around sometimes, and we have to be able to try to eat well and try to, take care of ourselves mentally and spiritually and emotionally, because, the burnout is real, and especially now in these times. And so I just appreciate that that Dr. Ruffin-Adams has brought this up, but also Dr. Morissette, that you have kind of pinpointed the importance of that during this time.
Right. So that's a part of it, Dr. Boyce. For me, the flexibility of being an adjunct in this pandemic has been great. I remember, Noelle, is it okay for me to say? She was like, well, April, I support any of your career initiatives, anything that you want to do. And I was like, Noelle, we're in the middle of a pandemic. My kids are at home. This is really, really wonderful for me right now. I have line sisters. One of my line sisters was a corporate attorney, and she resigned her position so she could homeschool her two sons. I mean, that's the world we're living in now. And you're right. And in the middle of that, we are being asked to do so much. And because Zoom is the new cell phone, right? It's the new text message. There's no reason why Camille Wilson can't be in a conference in Greensboro because she's in Michigan, because we have Zoom now, right? She doesn't have to come all the way down here and decline that invitation. And it also doesn't mean that if she had 3 more conferences that she had to appear in today in different places all over the country, that's the expectation now almost. And so even as we're able to take control of our lives, it was funny when Dr. Boyce said that she manages every hour of her day. I remember Camille Wilson as her graduate assistant, when I would watch her with every minute. And she would say at 5:54, I have to go pick up Amari. And she would fly out of the office at top speed to get to the daycare because she had it timed out exactly to the minute how long it would take. And I watched that, as I decided, watching my, at that time, emerging Black woman leader to fulfill her space, how do I want to live? What is that going to look like? What do I want to do? So certainly Dr. Wilson has been one of the mentors in my life, and figuring out how to be a Black woman leader, what that will look like for me. Mm-hmm.
Thank you all so much. I have one last question for you before we head out, and that is, I think in line with all of the work that you're already doing. So we know that there is a sudden public interest in having a more explicit conversation about racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. I myself have been in meetings and read notes from meetings that often refer to it as an acronym, as a really quick thing like, oh yeah, of course, this, right? And I'm wondering, I know this is sort of impossible, but if in the brief time that we have left, which is about 1.5 minutes each, you might want to speak to the challenges, or I guess what you think should be emphasized in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion training at the institutional level. It's all work that you're doing, right? But what are the great challenges that we face, and how do you think we might best approach how we do this work?
May I go first? I have my 1.5 minutes. So first, when you announced this, you could see all 3 of us do this motion. I think we're tired of talking. A part of it, a huge part of it, is we're tired of talking. Like Chancellor Gilliam said, we need to have action plans, and we need to have not only action plans, but we need to have action planned and action-packed results. So I think that's one of the things that is most necessary throughout every institution at this point, as we continue to have these conversations, to make some kind of concrete some kind of concrete result available that is changing, as Chancellor Gilliam said, the entire institution. Thank you.
Anyone else want to speak to that? I love it, Dr. Ruffin-Adams. I just love it.
I'll just say welcome. Welcome. I mean, the thing is that so many people have been doing this work, have been advocating for this work for years and years and years and years. And so I am cautiously, like I said, optimistic about the work that's happening in my department. I'm incredibly excited about the work that's happening here at UNCG. And I'm ready for people to roll up their sleeves. I think statements are nice, and public sentiments are important, right? They have a place. Private conversations have a place. But that's exactly it. Let's roll up our sleeves and get to work. And I'm excited to see what the next months and years bring.
So I agree with everything that's been said. And definitely Dr. Ruffin-Adams, implore to have action-based results. I think right away as task force, working groups, it's committees do their work, including the one I'm on, right? It's like, just get to alignment, like get to, need, vision, and policy. Like, what's the policy? What's the outcome? How is this all going to be outcome based in terms of action-oriented and justice-driven steps? The other thing is, similar to, what Dr. Boyce was alluding to in the welcome, is the administrative leaders need to be actively tapping additional people to do this work, and actively tapping white folks to do this work, and white folks to talk to other white folks and have certain conversations, certain bold conversations, and be a part of setting bold accountability measures. And so, when you first asked, part of my silence was, I'm tired, right? Because part of the challenge is I do too much. And, I think we probably all do. So as I continue to lead, I also have to be mindful when I need to step back. And also when I need to pause and let other folks fill in the gaps, so they can lead and they can take accountability for advancing this work too. So.
Thank you all so much for this conversation. I sincerely appreciate it. And I feel like we could talk for many more hours, but I know you are busy people, busy professionals, and we'll consider this a starting point, and I will look forward to future conversations with you all about these important subjects. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having
It's
me.
great to see
Thank
everyone.
you.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.